Our webinar today is titled the 2017 through 18 FAFSA, What School Counselors Need to Know. And we are happy to be joined by our presenter, Cindy Forbes Cameron. Cindy is a lead communications analyst at the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Federal Student Aid, where she has worked for more than 15 years. Welcome, Cindy. You now have the floor.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to clarify something before I really dive into this. The intended audience for this presentation is counselors and mentors who are already familiar with the FAFSA. So if you're brand new to the FAFSA, go ahead and listen in. You will pick up some information. But if you're a newbie and you need to know the basics about the FAFSA, then I would recommend that you go to studentaid.gov/FAFSA to get just the basic information that you need and learn all about it. Just explore that whole area of the website. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. The learning outcomes for today, among others, and some of the basic ones are that when we get through this webinar, we hope that you'll be able to know what the FAFSA launch date is for 2017-18 and for future years, actually. And number two, advise students on which FAFSA items require current information and which require older information. Then number three, you'll be able to locate fact sheets, videos, and other resources about federal student aid so that you can advise your students and their parents. We're going to talk about what's changing or what actually has changed already for 17-18, the reasons for the changes, some of the frequently asked questions that we're getting about timing and reporting information on the FAFSA and about the way it works. And then we'll go through a messaging/outreach calendar to help you sort of get your head around what you should be doing at different times of year. And then we'll talk about materials and resources for outreach. Where do you access them? What's available? What do we have for you? And keep in mind, everything that we offer you is free. Right, let's start with what has changed in 17-18. If you are already familiar with the FAFSA, you would know that there is a question that asks about whether a student or anybody in the family, in the household, has received any of a list of means-tested benefits over the past couple of years. And the reason we ask about this is that that question helps determine whether that student will be able to exclude assets from his or her FAFSA. This topic does get complicated, so I'm not going to go into it just now because the purpose of this webinar really is to provide an overview of the changes for the FAFSA. But suffice to say, Medicaid has now been added to that question that asks if anyone in the student's or parent's household received certain benefits in the last 2 years. The added guidance for foster youth is actually a link to the student's state child welfare agency. That's for students who aren't sure if they were in foster care. Some people actually don't really know, so that helps them connect with that state agency to find out. Then the enhanced guidance for homeless youth is actually an enhanced clarification for the homelessness definition. It's not a changing of the definition, it's just a clarification. That now gives examples such as you may be living in a park or, here, there, or wherever. It just gives some examples of where you might be if you are homeless. The opt-out requirement for the IRS data retrieval tool is a way to sort of basically force the applicant to really pay attention to the fact that the IRS DRT is available for him or her. And it makes them really think about it and say, oh, okay, maybe I do want to actually use this thing, rather than being able to just skip over it. The elimination of the FAFSA booklet, what you need to understand about that is that the pre-printed FAFSA booklet is not being printed anymore. But if you're working with students who don't have access to the internet and can't, download the PDF and use it, or can't apply at FAFSA.gov, you have a couple of options. One is for you to print out the FAFSA PDF for them, and then they can mail that in. or number two, they can call our EdPubs distributor and they can request a printout of the PDF emailed to them. So it is still possible to do the FAFSA on paper. It just comes from the PDF instead of that pre-printed booklet. Now, one thing that was going to change this year, but actually hasn't, is that the order in which a student lists colleges on his or her FAFSA may make a difference in eligibility for state financial aid. We've provided information on studentaid.gov about each state's preference as to the order the school should be listed on the FAFSA. So as an example, some states require that the student list a state school first on the list in order to be considered for state aid. It just depends on the state, so make sure that your students refer to this page on studentaid.gov to make sure they get it right. And the URL is on the slide, so when you download your handouts, you'll get that URL. And by the way, when the student is in the FAFSA filling it out, there is a link from the FAFSA to that page on studentaid.gov so they can get that guidance. All right, let's talk about the big changes on the FAFSA. Number one, the FAFSA launched earlier. The 17-18 FAFSA, if it was going on the same schedule that previous ones did, it wouldn't be available until January 1 of 2017, but it's already launched. It's been available since October 1st of this year, 2016. And that earlier launch on October 1st is going to be a permanent change. So the 18-19 FAFSA is going to launch October 1st of next year, and so on. Change number two is that beginning with the 17-18 FAFSA, students and parents now report income information from an earlier tax year. So for 17-18, the FAFSA requires 2015 income information rather than 2016 as it would have done in the past. Just wanted to make a note here that one benefit of this change requiring the early tax and income information is that from day one of the FAFSA launch, most people are able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. Now there are some exceptions. It's not available, for instance, if the parents filed separate returns or someone filed as head of household or filed a Puerto Rican or foreign tax return. There are certain restrictions around that. But people who are able to use IRS DRT now can do it right from the first day because they've already done their 2015 taxes. This little table just shows in a graphic format what the changes are to the timing. So for instance, if you look at the bold line, the third row down, if a student is planning to attend college at some point between July 1, 2017 and June 30th, 2018 during that school year, they're going to submit the 17-18 FAFSA, and they can submit the FAFSA anytime between October 1st of 2016, last month, and June 30th of 2018, and they're going to use income and tax information from 2015. And what you'll notice on this table is that that repeats the row above it, that income and tax information from 2015 is also required on the 16-17 FAFSA. And that is the topic of a couple of our frequently asked questions that we're going to get into in a couple of minutes. So before we jump into the FAQs, let's talk about the reasons for the changes. Why did we do this? Why do we make these changes? Briefly, many college applications for admissions are due in the fall. And it's great to be able to do the FAFSA around the same time because people are less confused. They feel like, okay, I'm getting everything in at the same time. They have a feel for what their expected family contribution is. They're able to compare schools more easily. They don't have to estimate their tax information, so they have a feeling of certainty. The IRS data retrieval tool is available immediately, as I mentioned, and there can be less pressure because what was happening in the past was that the FAFSA became available January 1st, and then people hadn't done their taxes yet, so they'd put in an estimate in the FAFSA, and then after they did their taxes, which, you know, for some people could be April 15th, then they'd have to go back in and update their FAFSA to match what they put on their taxes. Meanwhile, college signing day is May 1st, so there's that feeling of pressure at the last minute. So we've tried to do away with that. So here are some of the FAQs that we've received ever since we announced this change to the FAFSA. We announced it in September of last year, and there have been questions coming in since then, and we've tried to address them. The first one was, will deadlines be earlier? For the most part, no. Most state and school deadlines are not changing, have not changed. However, there are several states that have changed from as soon as possible after January 1st to as soon as possible after October 1st. This is for certain state aid programs. Keep in mind that states will use a student's FAFSA information to assess eligibility for their own financial aid programs, and schools do the same thing too. So this is why there are different deadlines for states, for schools, etc. The federal deadline is, you know, just do your FAFSA by, you know, get it in during that time frame that it's available between October 1st and June 30th of 2018. But for states and schools, they need to assess eligibility for their programs. So there are some states that have changed to as soon as possible after October 1st, and because the funding for those programs can be limited, we definitely recommend that students in those states get their FAFSAs in as early as possible to maximize their eligibility for aid. State deadlines can be found on FAFSA.gov. School deadlines are on school websites. One thing that I just wanted to mention, there's a couple of other questions that I didn't put on the slide, but I just did want to mention them briefly. One question that a couple of people have asked is, you know, is the Department of Education contacting students to let them know about these changes, you know, that the FAFSA was launched earlier? Yes, college students, we have emailed people who filed a FAFSA last year, and we've emailed them to say, you know, hey, guess what, it's available earlier now. And that's actually generated a slew of people renewing their FAFSAs over the last few weeks since the emails started going out. And but as far as high school students go, no, we don't have a way of getting their email addresses or contacting them. We don't know, you know, who they are. We don't have their information. So we're relying on you guys to make sure that you tell your students to get their FAFSAs done as soon as they can. Another question that is not on the slide, but that I've heard a couple of times now is, you know, do I have to have my school list all set before I fill out the FAFSA? And I think that one's becoming less common, but actually that question's been around for a little while, and the answer is no, don't worry about it. You know, just put in the schools that you plan to apply to, and if you don't apply to all of them, it's not a big deal. So next question is, will 16-17 FAFSA information be carried over to the 17-18 renewal FAFSA? No, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that too much information could have changed in that time, and that just becomes too complicated and too prone to errors. And keep in mind that the IRS data retrieval tool does provide easy importation of tax data to keep the process quick. We had people filling out their FAFSAs in just a few minutes. On October 1st, when the FAFSA first launched, there were a few people, I think it was 3 or 4 people, submitted their renewal FAFSAs within just a few minutes after the FAFSA launched. So if you use the IRS DRT, it can be really, really quick. Another reason that we didn't do this is because, you know, it's only 1 year that this is happening, that we have the, you know, the same tax data required on 2 FAFSAs in a row. So it didn't make sense to spend taxpayer money setting up our system to do that when, you know, there could be errors and it would take a lot of time and effort and money. So we just want people to use the IRS DRT if they're eligible for it, and go ahead and just do that renewal FAFSA and type in some of that information again. Doesn't take that long. This one's a biggie. People are asking, can a student choose to report 2016 information if they feel like it's more accurate? They actually don't have a choice of which year's information to report. They have to answer the FAFSA questions as they're written. If the family's income has changed since the 2015 tax year, what the student should do is provide the information the FAFSA asks for, then submit the FAFSA, and then immediately talk to the college financial aid office about the family situation. Now keep in mind that for certain items on the FAFSA, the student must report as of today, quote unquote. And for most of these items, that's pretty simple. It's, what the balance of your savings and checking accounts as of today. That's pretty easy to look up and report. But it could get tricky when it comes to the student's or parent's marital status. So we're going to look at that in a second. Just wanted to point out a couple of tips as far as providing information. It's really important to read the FAFSA instructions. And if you find that a student is confused about, okay, wait, what's as of today and what's asking for 2015 and, what's what, we've actually got a fact sheet with a table on it that shows the different categories of questions. And they can find that at studentaid.gov/FAFSA dates. The table is on page 2 of that fact sheet. Right, what if the marital status has changed since the 2015 taxes were filed? So let's say we're talking about the student parents. So they weren't married in 2015, but they are married now. So what needs to happen is the marital status is as of today. So they need to say, they need to report their status as married. And the spouse's income is going to need to be added to the FAFSA. So they wouldn't be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool because they filed totally separate tax returns in 2015. Then similarly, if the student or parent filed 2015 taxes as married but is no longer married when filling out the FAFSA, then the spouse's income will need to be subtracted. And if the student or parent was married when filing 2015 taxes, then got divorced, and is now married to someone else, then there's a bit more math to do. They're going to have to subtract the ex's income and add the new spouse's income. There is help text in FAFSA.gov that discusses all these situations. I just wanted to show a little preview of the screen that pops up. It says, attention, you must provide financial information from your 2015 tax return on the following pages. You indicated that you recently married or remarried because the FAFSA does ask for the date of the marital status, like when did you get married or divorced or whatever. And it says to correctly answer the student financial questions, you must report information about you and your current spouse, even if you filed separate tax returns for 2015. So it gives you that little that caveat that says, okay, you need to. This is how you need to do this. Okay, so the student fills out their FAFSA now using 2015 tax and income information. And then they do their taxes next spring. And now they've done their 2016 taxes. Should they update their FAFSA to include the 2016 tax information once the taxes are filed? No. This is a myth that's been going around social media since the summer. I don't know where it came from. People are like definitively telling each other that this is what you're supposed to do. Please set your students and parents straight about this. The FAFSA asks for 2015 tax information. Does not ask for 2016. You're not supposed to update. You need to report the information regarding the year that the FAFSA asks for. So if a student is applying earlier, let's say, now, earlier than they did in the past or earlier than they would have, are they going to receive their aid offers from schools earlier? The answer to that is not necessarily. It kind of depends on the school. Some schools are making offers earlier and others won't. A good way of doing a cost comparison of schools based on averages is to go to collegescorecard.ed.gov. So that's something the student can check in the meantime while they're waiting for those aid offers. And here's something that I should have updated, and I do apologize for that. Early aid offers may be estimates, just to keep that in mind. Now, this parenthetical is incorrect. Pell Maximum not scheduled to be announced until early 2017. The Pell Maximum has been announced already, and if you go to studentaid.gov, you will see it on there. So sorry about that. Another FAQ is, okay, let's say a student was selected for verification in 16-17. So since 17-18 asks for the same year of tax information, is the student going to be selected for verification in 17-18 as well? No, there is not a rule in place that if a student was selected last year, they'll be selected this year as well, just because we're asking for the same tax information. But there isn't a rule in place that says they won't. It is possible to be selected 2 years in a row. Keep in mind, some schools verify all students, so they're going to be selected every year. And some students are selected randomly, and it's possible to be selected randomly 2 years in a row. Also, there are a bunch of factors that determine whether a student gets selected non-randomly, and they tend to change a bit from year to year, so you really can't know for sure. So don't let your students stress out about it. If they're selected for verification, they just need to look at what information is asked for and provide it and make sure they meet the school's deadline for providing that information. Here's the question I mentioned a little while ago. Does a student need to apply to schools before listing them on the FAFSA? No, they don't. The schools are going to review the FAFSA information once they're ready to admit the student. The student should not wait until they've applied to schools. And remember, they need to meet those deadlines, some of which are quite early. So if they think they're going to apply to the school, they should go ahead and list it on their FAFSA so that that information is waiting for the school at the time that the school is ready to look for it. Okay, let's look at outreach to your students, what you can do to inform students and parents about the FAFSA, both this year and in upcoming years. The calendar here shows a plan for increasing awareness among students and parents, preparing them for the FAFSA process and encouraging them to fill out the application as soon as possible once it becomes available. So let's go through the calendar really briefly to look at a recommended year of FAFSA awareness. These are some ideas for messaging and outreach to your students and their parents. In May and early June, you want to make sure they prep for the fall. Tell those rising seniors to get their FSA IDs. There's information here at studentaid.gov/FSA-ID. In early to mid-September, hold a financial aid night. Remind them about their FSA ID. Tell them to make sure that they know what it is. Explain that the FAFSA is coming soon and the importance of filling it out promptly. Early submission can mean a chance of more money for some of those first-come, first-served aid programs from the states or the schools. In October, it's great if you're able to. You can hold a FAFSA completion event, and you can provide hands-on help filling out the FAFSA. And make sure that you explain next steps. A lot of students are very confused about what happens after they do the FAFSA. They think that, okay, I did my FAFSA, now I'm going to get a check in the mail from the government. Explain to them that it doesn't work that way. There are other things that they might need to do, such as, going through verification. They need to look at school aid offers and indicate which aid they want to accept. If they're going to get a loan, they need to sign their master promissory note. They need to understand all these things. Basically, the most important thing that they should understand is that it's the school that's going to administer their aid. They shouldn't be looking for the Department of Education to send them money. November through April, you're helping them to interpret and compare those aid offers, and do emphasize the importance of meeting deadlines set by colleges for providing any additional information. And please tell them to check their email and do it often, including their junk folder. I know a lot of people don't check email very much these days, but at the moment, that is the primary way that we are keeping in touch with people, and I know some schools are as well. Resources for outreach. If you're not aware of the Financial Aid Toolkit, I definitely recommend that you check it out. This is a website that was specifically designed for you, the school counselor or college access mentor. Please be aware, this site is not for you to send students or parents to. It's not for them. It doesn't speak to them. It doesn't have the level of detail that they need to know. This toolkit consolidates our federal student aid resources into a searchable online database in the Search Financial Aid Tools and Resources section. It's intended for use by any organizations and individuals who are supporting and counseling students and families on making financial preparations for college. As you can see, it's split into 4 sections. Learn about financial aid talks about just general information. What are the aid programs and how can you help students understand them? And we do have a bunch of links in there that go over to our student site, studentaid.gov. And we also have information in that section about the FAFSA, and we have a FAFSA updates page where you can look at a draft of the upcoming FAFSA once that's available. You can find out when various FAFSA materials are going to be there for you online or in print as appropriate. Conduct outreach. That section talks to you about some of the frequently asked questions that might come from different audiences, such as parents or non-citizens or student loan borrowers, if you work with any of them, and how to answer those questions. This section also talks about, okay, so what do you do if you want to host a FAFSA completion event? It gives ideas about that, and it sends you over to a couple of PowerPoint presentations. The Get Training section gives information about any training conferences, or mostly webinars these days, that federal student aid staff are participating in. And this training area is specifically aimed toward your professional development. If you want to find out about events and webinars that are for students and parents in particular, you would go over to studentaid.gov for that. Then, as I mentioned, the Search Financial Aid Tools and Resources section is a searchable database. Here are a few things that you might want to be aware of on the Financial Aid Toolkit site. Financialaidtoolkit.ed.gov/FAFSA is the FAFSA section. /resources is that searchable database of everything, fact sheets, PowerPoints, videos, infographics, all kinds of stuff is on there. Archives of certain webinars that we've done. You can find so many things in that section. /FAFSA changes is an announcement that we put out in September of last year that talked about the upcoming 17-18 changes, and it provides you with just a general overview of the changes, and then it links you to all kinds of stuff like talking points, table of that table that we looked at several slides back of the launch dates and the tax years, fact sheet, the outreach calendar, PowerPoint presentations. There's a lot of stuff on that page. And that is specifically about the 17-18 FAFSA. At the resources page, you can filter resources by the topic 2017-18 FAFSA to see what items specifically discuss the changes for the 17-18 cycle. So on this slide, it shows the Search Tools and Resources page with that topic selected. So what you're seeing here is there are 4 drop-downs. One is resource type, one is audience type, and the one that's open on this SNP is the topic. and the little red arrow points to 2017-18 FAFSA as the topic. You don't have to select something in every drop-down. You can just go to the topic drop-down, select 2017-18 FAFSA, then you go over to the right to the red button that says Get Resources. You click on that, and it'll give you all the resources we have that talk specifically about the 17-18 FAFSA. If you want everything that has to do with the FAFSA at all, whether 17-18 or more general, there is a FAFSA option just above where that red arrow is, and you can click that one instead, or as well as, and get all the FAFSA resources. This screenshot is just showing a few of the resources that we have available. These are some of the search results that pop up after you select that 17-18 FAFSA topic in the resources search tool. Now, I've mentioned studentaid.gov a few times now, and I hope that you guys are all familiar with it. But just in case you're not, I wanted to make sure that I showed it and emphasize that this is a website for students and parents. So please make sure you send your students to studentaid.gov and not to the financial aid toolkit. As you can see, studentaid.gov is split into sections that cover various aspects of preparing for and paying for college. We've got a section on preparing for college that has information about choosing a career and choosing a school. It talks about budgeting. It's got our college preparation checklist for various ages of students. The checklist also talks to parents, so you should take a look at them. The types of aid section talks about surprise, surprise, types of aid, including grants, loans, and work study, and then it goes into more detail about Pell Grants versus federal supplemental educational opportunity grants, and subsidized and unsubsidized loans versus Perkins loans. There's information in there about interest rates. There's information in there as well about financial aid scams and finding scholarships. The Who Gets Aid section has eligibility criteria for the basic generation, the basic population, but then it also talks about non-citizens. It talks about people with criminal convictions, various things, various topics in that section. The FAFSA section of the site has information all the way from the beginning of the process of filling out the FAFSA right through to the next steps after you've filled it out. And how to repay your loans is obviously talking about how to repay your loans, including information about deferment, forbearance, loan forgiveness, and the various repayment plans that are available. This is just a screenshot of the FAFSA applying for aid section of the site, showing in rather a blurry manner on my screen the different topics that you can find in this section. Just go ahead and check it out yourself rather than trying to read the screen. If you go to studentaid.gov/resources, in the FAFSA section of that page, you'll find a number of items, fact sheets, booklets, videos, infographics, all about the FAFSA. This is just a selection of some of what we have available. You'll see that there's one here called College Students and Parents, What You Need to Know About the 17-18 FAFSA. That's one that talks specifically about the changes for this year. You can see this is an old snip because we still have something next to it that says the Spanish version is coming spring of 2016. We do try to update and include Spanish information as promptly as we can after the English, but it always does lag behind the English a little bit. So that college students and parents item that you're looking at there, it's really designed for people who've done the FAFSA before, because students who have never done it before, to them it's not that big a deal that things have changed. I mean, they might have heard about their older siblings or friends doing their FAFSA and talking about January 1st. But for the most part, we've been really reaching out to people who've done it before to tell them what's new and just to make sure that they do it promptly. This is the student version of the announcement that I mentioned on the Financial Aid Toolkit site. This is the FAFSA changes for 17-18 that you can find at studentaid.gov/FAFSA-changes. And it's got that the general overview of what the changes are. It's got that that table on it that shows the dates, which FAFSA to submit for when, and what dates you can submit to FAFSA, and which income and tax information you're looking at. So this is something that we've made available for students so that they can just get the high-level overview of what's new and different. I wanted to let you know, just in case you weren't aware, that we are the Office of Federal Student Aid. We are on Twitter and Facebook, and we have a YouTube channel as well. We have several playlists on the YouTube channel on college preparation and financial aid topics, including the FAFSA. And you are welcome to link to the videos or embed them in your own website. Our content is in the public domain, so you may share it as long as you don't charge people for it. If your students need help with the FAFSA, they can get help on the FAFSA.gov site. There is help text on the site. There's an explanation for every question on the FAFSA. During certain hours, I think it's 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern, approximately that, there are customer service representatives available for chat sessions. So if somebody's in the FAFSA and trying to fill it out, they can have a chat session with a representative. They also can call 1-800-FORFEIT-AID, or if you've got a couple of days to wait for an answer and it's not that urgent, you want to go into a little more detail about a question, you can email studentaid@ed.gov. I want to go ahead and open up for questions, and before we do, I just wanted to point out that I have Kira Mosley-Hobbs with me. She is from our policy office, and if we have any questions that Kira can contribute to, you will hear a voice in addition to mine.
All right, thank you, Cindy. So we do have a lot of questions coming in, and I'm trying to weed through some of these. Some of these are quite specific, so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get into those. So first, there's some feedback that the link isn't working. Studentaid.ed.gov, filling out the school list, filling out /school list.
Okay, I will double check on that.
Okay, and then, so have the deadlines for currently enrolled college students for California Cal Grants not changed?
I don't know state deadlines off the top of my head, especially for specific state programs. That's the kind of thing where somebody would need to check with their state on that. I would just, honestly, I would go to a search engine on the internet and look for Cal Grants.
Okay, perfect. Okay, trying to pick some that are not. There was a question that asked if parents were never married but are living together, or never married and not living together. Does the FAFSA still ask this? And will it be asking for this information on the date of the application as opposed to asking parental marital status as they did in 2015? You may have already addressed this, but just to reiterate.
Yeah, the questions about marital status have not changed. They're still the same ones as previously. So if somebody has a particular question in mind, like from last year, from 16-17, yeah, that's still going to be on there.
What should I advise students whose parents live together but they are not legally married? Do they only provide income info for parents who claim claim them, or both parents?
If it doesn't matter if they're married or not. If they're living together and they're the student's parents, then they would both be reported on the FAFSA.
Okay. How did this? Okay. Cindy, are you able to see the questions on the GoToWebinar menu?
I am clicking now.
Okay. I think it might be best if you can, weed through and see which ones you're able to answer and which ones haven't already been addressed. But if you can't see that, I can certainly still read them.
I can see the questions part. Oh, okay. Yes, I can see the questions. And somebody else says, the website link works for me.
Oh,
okay. I was actually flipping through my my PowerPoint on my laptop here, trying to find which slide has that URL so I could test it while we're still on the phone. And this person has very helpfully said using Chrome as their browser, their website links work for them. All right. Yes, some of these questions are extremely specific.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, these are interesting.
So if there are any that you're able to answer with the time that we have left, if you could just read them out loud and then answer them.
Yes, I'm looking. I just came across several really, really specific ones in a row, so that kind of bogged me down a little bit. Okay, here's one, and this one does come up, so I would like to address this. I have a student whose father refuses to give his daughter his financial information to put on the FAFSA because he does not want to help her with college. Any advice for this student? I thought about perhaps telling her mother about the IRS DRT tool, but don't want to overstep my professional boundaries. Okay, well, without really knowing all the details of this, there are a number of ways that we could answer this one. For instance, I can't tell whether the mother and father are married and or living together, but it kind of sounds like they might be divorced. I'm going to answer this as if they're divorced, and we'll go from there. So if the parents are divorced and the student is living with the mother, then the student would be providing the mother's information and would not be required to provide the father's information. So that would be, his willingness or otherwise to provide his information for the FAFSA would be moot. If the parents are divorced or whatever and the student's living with the father and the father doesn't want to provide his information on the FAFSA and doesn't want to help the daughter with college, the FAFSA will actually take that into account. The way it works is that when she's going through her FAFSA, it's going to ask her if she has access to parent information. And she can say no, and then it's going to ask, okay, well, is this lack of parent information for like special circumstances? It'll give a couple of examples of things in there. She's going to have to say no to that because this isn't that kind of situation. This is one where the father just doesn't want to provide his information. So what will happen is the FAFSA will allow her to submit her FAFSA without providing the father's information. But what she's going to have to do at that point is she's going to have to get in touch with her college like right away and say, okay, this is my situation. My father isn't going to help me with college. He's not going to support me, and he doesn't want to provide his information on the FAFSA. And what happens is that her FAFSA won't be processed. She won't get an expected family contribution because if she's a dependent student, she is required to provide parent information on the FAFSA, and she hasn't done so. Therefore, her FAFSA is not like fully processed. But if she can work with the school and the school will accept, usually what happens is the school will ask for something from her father saying that he is not supporting her, is not going to support her during college, and is unwilling to provide his information on the FAFSA. They'll ask for that from him. And if she provides all that, then, and the school is okay with it, then what will happen is she will then possibly be eligible to get an unsubsidized loan, and that is it. She won't be able to get any need-based aid because you can't get need-based aid such as a Pell Grant, for instance, if you don't have an EFC. The EFC is required in order to figure out your Pell eligibility. And there's a knock-on effect from this as well, which is that there are other programs out there that require an expected family contribution in order to assess eligibility for them. Here's an example. The Gates Millennium Scholarship has always wanted Pell eligible students, and if you don't know if you're Pell eligible, then you can't qualify for Gates Millennium Scholarship, and there's a bunch of things like that. So we recommend that if there's any possible way for a student to get their parents' information on the FAFSA, that is the most desirable way of doing things. There is information about this in studentaid.gov. If you go in the FAFSA section, you can go into the page that talks, there's two pages in question here. One is the dependency status page, and it talks about, you know, what if I don't live with my parents, what if this, what if that. The other page is called reporting parent information, and they both talk about things like, you know, what if the student can't get the parent information for their FAFSA. All right, we're going to look through some of these other ones. Okay, if a student discovers a school and applies after having submitted the FAFSA, is it easy for them to add this additional school? Yeah, it is easy actually. What they would do, so let's say they've submitted the FAFSA and then now they're going, ooh, I want to go to this other school and I didn't list it on my FAFSA in the first place. They log back in at FAFSA.gov, they can go into their account and they can add the school at that point. What will happen at that point is that that school will then have that student's FAFSA information available to it, and once the student applies to the school and the school is, you know, offering it the student admission, then the school will take a look at the student's FAFSA information. The only way that this gets a little funky is if the student has already listed 10 schools on their FAFSA, because the FAFSA will only allow 10 at a time to be listed. What they'd have to do then is they'd have to delete one of the schools that's already on there and replace it with the new school. There is somebody who's asked if there is going to be a recording of this session. Jen, do you want to provide that information?
Yes, so this session is being recorded right now and it will be available on our website, both on the main webinar page and then also on the webinar on demand page, all of which is found under the professional development tab of the ASCA website.
Okay, there's another question here. If a student receives child support from her father through direct deposit but does not even know where he lives, is he part of her FAFSA? This is a good example of one of the things that's covered in the in studentaid.gov in the section that talks about, you know, dependency status, and then the reporting parent information. That page talks about, you know, if my parents don't, you know, are divorced or whatever, how do I know which parent's information to provide? Now, it sounds like probably this student is living with her mother because this student doesn't even know where her father lives and the father's providing child support. No, the father is not going to be reported on her FAFSA. He's not around. If she's living with the mother, she's going to report the mother's information. Okay. I'm just scrolling through to look for some more. Okay, if a student is not living with their parents, they've run away or they've been kicked out, what direction can I give them about filling out the FAFSA? I would definitely recommend going to studentaid.gov/dependency to look at that one. There are provisions for dealing with situations where the student has left home due to, let's say, abuse or whatever, and it is possible for the student to work with the financial aid office at the college, and the school can do what's called a dependency override if they see that that is appropriate in that situation. They have to look at every student's situation individually, and the student is not necessarily going to get the same response from every college that they talk to.
Nope, and if the circumstance that the student is homeless, the institution or the college can also consider the student for unaccompanied homeless youth determination, which is kind of like a dependency override, except for the circumstances are a little bit more specific, and there's a few requirements on that. But there's some options for students like that.
Thanks, Kira. Okay, what if the student's parents do not live together? The student lives with their mother, but the father claims him. Do I just list the mother on the FAFSA? Yeah, who claims the student on their taxes is irrelevant for FAFSA purposes. If the student's parents are like divorced, whatever, not living together, and the student lives with the mother, then the mother is the one that gets listed on the FAFSA. If a student has a parent who's undocumented, do they still need to provide income information for that parent? What if one parent is a U.S. citizen but the other is not? The parent citizenship status is not asked about on the FAFSA. So yeah, if the student's parents are living together, the student lives with them, they would list both parents on the FAFSA. The FAFSA does ask for parent social security numbers. If a parent doesn't have a social security number, please tell them do not try to list the tax identification number. They should just put all zeros on the FAFSA for that parent in the social security number field, and it will accept it. Okay, there's a large number of students who don't speak English who need financial aid. If they contact the 1-800 number, will someone be able to assist the student? If they speak Spanish, yes. There are Spanish-speaking customer service representatives at that number. Okay, there's a question, does it matter the age of the student? Is this FAFSA process for any age student seeking higher education? It is for any age students. There's no sort of, upper limit or whatever. It's, if you're an adult student and you want to go back to school, feel free, fill out the FAFSA. It's not just for people leaving high school and going to college. What if the parents did not file income taxes? Well, if they weren't required to file income taxes, then they'll just say on the FAFSA that they weren't required to file income taxes, and then the FAFSA asks for things like income earned from work and things like that. So it takes that into account that, not everybody is required to file.
If you enter amount in the income earned from work and the FAFSA recognizes using IRS income grids that the individual was required to file, then the FAFSA is going to give them an edit and error message telling them that they were required to file. You get past that, in most circumstances, the post-secondary institution or the college will actually stop the student and ask for documentation and tax information, because based on the income earned from work, the individual was required to file. You want to determine what income requires someone to file. You want to go to irs.gov and look at publication 17. You can Google it. There's a find feature on that website, and it can give you that information. The income grid actually changes every year. I think this year it's about 10,750. I'm not completely sure, but you just want to check publication 17 each year to make sure your students don't have issues there.
The next question is, what will be required for a student on the FAFSA who is applying, who is currently in foster care or a ward of the state? There's actually, in the dependency status questions, it asks at any time up until 18 were you in foster care or a ward of the court, is the way it's worded. And if you say yes to that, then you are considered an independent student and you don't have to provide your parents' information. So it's actually becomes, if you were a foster care student, then it actually becomes a little bit easier for you because you don't have to, like, you know, you're not expected to go out there and find your parents.
Right. And just a note on that, if you have a student who is held at a juvenile detention center, that is not considered ward of the court for financial aid purposes.
Okay, I'm going to go scroll down a little bit here to some of the newer questions that have been coming in. If the parents are divorced and the student lives with the mother, but the father will be the one helping with paying for college, does the student put in both parents' income or just the mother's? It will be just the mother's. The FAFSA doesn't ask who's going to be helping to pay for college. What the FAFSA is looking at is the financial strength of the household. And the household is the mom's household because that's who the student lives with. There's this one funky little question on the FAFSA that everybody kind of forgets about and ignores, and it asks about other income or money paid on the student's behalf. That's where the father's help is going to come into play. So once the student's been in college and the father has, like, paid a tuition bill or two or something like that, then that money will be reported on that one little question on the FAFSA. That's how the dad comes into the picture.
And if you want to be really, really like regulatory, statutory specific on that, the FAFSA actually asks which parent is going to provide 50% or more of the student's care for the associated FAFSA year. Now, it's not unheard of for us to hear about, let's say in this example, the student lives with the mother, but the father is actually paying all the expenses, including the rent of the mother. Now, technically, that's providing 50% or more of the care. That's not going to be majority of your circumstances, but in case you come across one of those various instances that we have heard of, I think we've only heard of it 3 or 4 times in the past 10 years or so, but if you come across of it, that is, it's logical for that to happen.
Yeah, and I would say basically just read the instructions really carefully on the FAFSA. Read the questions. The instructions generally, it's, you know, whichever person the student lives with for more of the year.
Right.
And then if they live with both parents like exactly the same amount of time over the past year, then that's, in that case, they would definitely be looking at the financial support at that point. Let's see what else we have here. Is there a plan for the FAFSA to allow more than 10 schools to access the FAFSA? I am not aware of a current plan for a student to be able to list more than 10 schools on the same transaction of the FAFSA. A transaction is like one time that you go in and you put information into the FAFSA and then you submit it. That's just not in the plans because the vast majority of students actually only list one school on their FAFSA. And as I mentioned before, if a student wants additional schools to be able to access their FAFSA information, they can go back in, log back in at FAFSA.gov and put in those additional schools. Jen, do we want to do a time check?
Yes, so it is at the top of the hour now, so I'm available to hang on if you want to get to a couple more questions, but obviously I want to be respectful of your time as well. So if you have other commitments, please, you know, we can definitely end now if that's the case.
I'm happy to keep looking through a few more of these questions. I have this meeting room for a little while longer. However, we will need to wrap up in a few minutes.
Definitely. Okay, let's get maybe 3 more questions, if that's okay.
Okay, that sounds great. I wanted to thank Kira for helping out. She needs to go to a different meeting now, but she's always great to have on board because she knows all that nitty-gritty policy stuff, and that can help out quite a bit. All right, so here's another question. This year, the stepfather is not working. Should they use last year's numbers or this year's? There is something on the FAFSA that asks that whether one of the parents is a dislocated worker. A dislocated worker has a specific definition. It's explained on the FAFSA, but for instance, if the stepfather was laid off or something, then you could say yes, and then the FAFSA will take that into account. Generally, what I would tell people is fill out the FAFSA using the information that it asks for. Don't decide what year's income information you want to put on there because you think things should work a certain way. You have to answer the questions as they're asked. And then if anything's going to be changed to take into account the special circumstances of the family, that is up to the financial aid office at the school. So number one, fill out the FAFSA as it tells you to, and then number two, talk to the school financial aid office, and then you can go from there. See what other questions we can find here. Okay, if a student submits the FAFSA twice, so to 20 different schools, so they've done their 10 schools and then they've done another 10 schools, will the first round of schools still have access to the information? Yes, they will. If not, how does that work to avoid missing deadlines? Not a problem. The first round of schools will still have access to the information. As I mentioned before, that's called a transaction. That first round of schools will always have access to the information on any FAFSA transaction on which the schools were listed. The only way that this could get a little tricky is if the student changes FAFSA information other than the schools on their second transaction and then removes some of the schools and puts in new schools. Any schools that aren't listed on that new transaction are not going to be able to see that new information. Okay, here's a question. Would the financial aid application be the same for international students? If an American citizen student lives in a country outside the U.S., they would fill out the same FAFSA. If a student is an international student, meaning they are not a U.S. citizen and they don't live in the United States, then they are not qualified for our federal student aid programs. I would recommend that if you need information about non-U.S. citizens and their eligibility for federal student aid, that you go to studentaid.gov/non-citizen and read that page, and you'll get information about who can and can't get our financial aid and what immigration status, visa status, etc., for international students that may be citizens of another country but actually are living in the U.S. Excuse me, that's 3 questions, and I would like to thank everybody for attending, and we'll go ahead and wrap up. I definitely recommend to get your questions answered. If I was not able to answer them today, that you go to studentaid.gov/FAFSA and explore that section of the site, and most of the commonly asked questions are going to be pretty easily found there.
All right, well, thank you so much, and thank all of you for joining us today for this webinar. We will post webinar on our website, schoolcounselor.org/webinar archive. It will also be listed on the main webinar page, the 2016 webinar series, which is also found on our website under the Professional Development tab. I hope to do this by tomorrow, but definitely by Monday at the latest. You can also take the CEU quiz for this webinar if you're interested in receiving CEUs. You'll receive a link to that shortly. ASCA will also offer webinars in the next upcoming months designed to give you practical ideas for your school counseling program. So we encourage you to register for these webinars, again, by going to our website, schoolcounselor.org/webinars. Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, everyone. Thanks.